Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the Career Fair and Esports Day at Siege. We had some great workshops this morning on team formation, great turnouts from the local game centers and the colleges, Georgia State University, Kennesaw State University, Oglethorpe, UGA, and others. So it looks like there's still a great deal of interest in esports around the area. One thing that we find dramatically lacking still in Georgia is a robust professional esports team. We've got great competitions here, but most of the competitors come from elsewhere around the world, other states, and so on. And we know that part of having a true esports community in Georgia requires having real professionals calling this home base, having events here, and bringing attention to what is going on here already. We've got some of the best events in the world between the Blue Mammoth Championship, between ELeague, and of course the Hi-Rez Expo. But now it's time to get more of the pros here. So I'm very happy to have what I consider a panel on esports that would be on par with anywhere in the world, and especially on the topic of going pro. So I'm going to start to my right and ask all of our panelists to introduce themselves.
My name is David Schulman. I'm an attorney with Greenberg Traurig, and I've been doing gaming and esports work for the past 13, 14 years.
Hi, my name is Shilpa Israelov. I'm a counsel for Turner Sports, and I support our ELeague property. I'm newer to the world of esports, having kind of joined Turner in 2016, and that's when ELeague started as well. So I'm really excited about getting more involved in business.
Yeah, I'm Josh. I'm associate producer at Blue Mammoth, and I focus on esports and PR for Brawlhalla.
Sean Smith with Arena Data. We're developing artificial intelligence engines that help predict the amateurs that can go pro in esports and also connect students with esports scholarships that are now available.
Hi, I'm Nate Blair. I'm the general counsel at Skillshot Media and Hi-Rez Studios. If you don't know Skillshot, we're the esports arm of Hi-Rez Studios, which we started up within the last couple of years.
I'm Brandon Roukey. I'm a former pro player, and I currently work doing league operations for Paladins for Skillshot Media and Hi-Rez Studios.
I'm Greg Panek. I was a former professional player in Paladins. I've managed teams and coached teams, including Denial, Team Eager, and SK Gaming.
So what you're seeing up here is a great variety of perspectives on what it means to be professional. Folks who work with the pros and folks who are the pros. And that's what I love about this setup. You're going to get a unique look at what's involved in this. So a lot of folks do think that going pro just means you're going to enter competitions, start winning games, winning $1 million a year, and that's all there is to it. But what I'd love from our panelists to talk about are what are some of the biggest failings they have seen from people or teams or groups trying to go pro or act professionally. Everyone here has had to deal with them across a broad spectrum. So I know there have been a lot of successes, but I'm sure those failures have stood out. David, you want to jump on it?
Sure. I think amateur players who want to go professional need to have a long view of what their career is going to look like. I think esport careers are generally relatively short. They're 3-4 year careers. There's a lot of talent. And I think they need to keep in mind what those 3-4 years are going to look like for them, how they're going to build, what do they want to do after that career is over, how to maximize their income while they're playing. Do they build up a streaming community around their personality? Do they pick up endorsements? And what is the plan for after that time is over? Do they want to go work in the industry? Do they want to be a coach or a GM of a team? So I want players who want to go pro to think more broadly about what that career can look like, not just the 2, 3, 4 years that they're playing professionally in the league, trying to maximize their winnings and earnings by playing the game and the tournaments.
I would echo what David said, and just to add to that, some of the more practical matters to take into consideration in the beginning, things such as immigration. Do you have the paperwork in place in order to go and participate in these events? My understanding is that teams might have an idea of the tournaments that they want to participate in, and before signing up and agreeing and committing to that, you want to make sure you're actually able to get there. I believe that there have been tournaments that have been canceled because players just weren't able to get the paperwork in order. Um, the other thing, and this is probably echoing what David said, but is just making sure that your vision for what you want is aligned with what the team's vision is as well. And I think if you really think that through, that will help to mitigate some of the legal risks down the line. And so really just making sure that your visions are aligned.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Like a lot of people, it's those things that people don't think about, right? Like getting a passport. A lot of people don't think about like, oh, I need a passport to get to DreamHack in Sweden. It's just something that you kind of it just slips your mind, right? And kind of to bring up a different point here, if you're looking for like a sponsor or something to help you with that sort of thing, be sure to vet the sponsor as they're vetting you, right? You want to make sure that what you're signing isn't going to be something that is incredibly detrimental to you just because you want to say you have a sponsor. Like it's just one of those like, oh, that's checked off. I have a sponsor now. Really make sure that you know the organization you're looking into and they're not just a Twitter account that has some sort of like side sponsor sort of thing that just gives you I don't know something for your controller, but an actual sponsor that will help you get to events and has maybe an actual team behind them already.
Well, yeah, if we're going to keep going down the line here, I'd like to add to that, a lot of the comments that you've heard so far are kind of telling you that you have to be your own representative and you have to do a lot of effort. And that is true right now. Esports as a whole has sort of failed as far as creating structures around amateurism, farm systems, this idea of how do I take step A, step B, step C, step D, go pro. That doesn't exist yet. So in today's landscape, you really do have to be out there and market yourself, promote yourself. You have to be the one that's compiling all your statistics, your wins, your losses. You need to be aggressive and go out to events and walk up to tournaments and teams and say, this is who I am. Look at these tournaments I've won so that they can start really looking at you. Because right now, I feel like most teams are probably just picking low hanging fruits because they don't have that sort of farm system recruiting mentality quite yet. It's coming. They're getting there. Especially a lot of the bigger leagues are doing a great job. But that infrastructure hasn't existed until really the last year or so.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, just real quick to mention on that point, you really have to make sure that people know you exist. That's the biggest thing. There's so many people that want to go pro in esports, and that means that you need to make sure there's something about you that stands out. So just really make sure you stand out, whether it be with a good Twitter account or with just like a fantastic list of tournaments that you've made top 8 in, and just send it out. Just send it to everybody. Just pass them out. It's not going to hurt at all to just send your resume basically out to everybody.
So I would agree with all of those things, and I guess I'll go in a slightly different direction and talk about something else that you should be doing as an individual player, which is if you want to be a professional, you should act like a professional while you're an amateur. I think there's a lot of people out there that sort of forget that there's a difference between hey, I'm playing 8 hours a day, and hey, I'm practicing to be as good as I can be in competition. And that practice versus I'm playing is one important distinction. But also just as a general matter, I mean, and this goes back to some of the things people are talking about in terms of like having your passport, et cetera, right? I mean, when you're at competition, you are there to compete, right? Yeah, it's going to be fun and you're hanging out with a lot of people that hopefully you like, but you're there to compete and think about what it is that you most want to get out of that weekend, which is you're hoping to raise a trophy at the end, that sort of thing. So all those other things are extremely important as well. And I think I would throw a little bit in that category too. Find hopefully a good advisor that can help you with some of those things, not just somebody who's on the sponsoring org, but somebody who's really sort of your advisor, right? And maybe that's an accountant, maybe that's somebody who was a former pro that can mentor you, maybe that's a friend, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's an attorney, but somebody that you trust that really is just looking out for your interests and kind of help you with some of those things. Not just somebody that's on your sponsoring org.
Yeah, I think there were definitely a lot of good points made, especially what Nate touched upon with professionalism in esports. Even as an amateur player, you're always being looked at. whether you know it or not. And how you act on the internet, how you act in game, how you act on social media, the internet is unforgiving. And if somebody wants to find out something about you, they can go back and look. So not only are you a representative professionally of yourself, but if you are representing an organization or a brand or a sponsor, the way that you act reflects on them. And no organization or sponsor is going to want to pick up somebody who has a really poor attitude or acts a certain way on social media. So you always want to be mindful of that. And to kind of touch on the competitive aspect of things, one mistake that I see a lot of people making when it comes to failing at esports early is not working with your team long enough, not giving the people that you play with long enough to flourish into a team that can be successful. And I see so many players who, give it a week before they split up and they pick up new people. And generally, that isn't a good idea. You want to try to work with a group of people for an extended period of time, get to know them, get to know how they play. And always be a positive personality. Nobody wants somebody on their team who is extremely negative all the time or is more detrimental to the team, regardless of how good you are, to actually being able to pick up brands and pick up sponsors and become successful as a team altogether.
One quick thing I'll throw in. So I completely echo what you said, Brandon. I mean, that's a great point about the internet being forever and unforgiving. And bear in mind, like, there's no distinction in esports between, hey, that was not my player handle. That was, my personal handle. If you put it on the internet, that was you as a pro. That was you as a person. It's all the same. So, don't think that makes a difference.
Yeah, going off that positivity thing, it's something I struggled with when I was younger. Nothing hurts your career more than just building a bad reputation early on. If you're trash talking people constantly, you have almost nothing to gain from that, honestly. It could be friendly banter, but if you're being mean to people and then you're looking for a team in a game, let's say you switch games, those guys that you were trash talking, let's say they're on the best team in the next game that you just moved on to, they're not going to want to team with you. Let's say you just say something really, really hurtful on Twitter to someone. An organization's not going to want to deal with you. Players aren't going to want to deal with you. They're not going to want to associate with you. Basically, having an ego can pretty much kill any chances of going pro. It's something I struggled with when I was younger. And as I got older, I started realizing you're better off just networking and being nice to people, building relationships. Just you're not going to play pro forever, 3 years, 4 years usually, depending on the game, obviously. If you want to get into the industry, you want to be friends with players, industry professionals, developers, pretty much anyone you can get a hold of. You have more to gain from being nice to people than being mean. So yeah, just stay positive.
Yeah, I'd actually like to add to that real quick. I've talked to a lot of esports organizations and universities about what kind of data they want to see and what's important to them whenever they're recruiting players. And it was very telling to me that all of them responded with some sort of flavor of they're really only looking at skill for about 50% of the equation. The other 50% is personality. Because they have had plenty of issues where they get the best players in the world, but they come in and they're toxic, and that kills the rest of the team. So it really does impact your team and your recruitability if you have that negative presence online. If you have a poor attitude, if you're a poor teammate, if you've got that me mentality, teams look at that. And if you're lucky enough to get recruited, they'll boot you real quick as soon as they figure out that that's who you are.
Just to pick up on that, teams are small, right? It's 5+2 subs or 5+3 subs. So the dynamic within the team is very important. And somebody that people like to play with and somebody that people like to be with, it's important within that team dynamic.
Yeah, yeah. And he mentioned that people, these orgs, are really only looking at like 50% skill, and then the rest is kind of how you handle yourself. That means that not only do you have to not be toxic, you actually also have to be active online. Like, I've had players that don't really perform all that well in tournaments get picked up because of their just who they are. It's really easy for that sponsor to get their name around if this player is constantly putting their name around, right? So you can the sponsor wants to attach their name to that because then more people are seeing their logo, their name, their team.
Yeah. As kind of an attest to that, when I first started working at Hi-Rez Studios and we were developing our professional league called the Paladins Premier League, we started working with an organization called WESA, which is the esports organization that handles a lot of the bigger orgs in the world. And I was tasked to make a document for WESA, which outlined every good player in our league, their marketability as far as who they were as an individual, how they carried themselves on social media, the presence that they had on Twitch, Twitter, etc. And I had to rank each individual player based on that. And that was pretty much what WESA went off of when it came to selecting players for the individual organizations. And I can't stress how important that really is. And in addition to that, to touch on what somebody said earlier about the fact that organizations are going to vet you, as much as they're going to do that, you need to be doing that for organizations because as unfortunate as it is, while there's a lot of positivity in esports when it comes to that, there's also a lot of negativity. There are a lot of organizations who want to take advantage of you. They want to give you really bad contracts that don't put you in a position to succeed as a competitive player. So I always advise to seek legal advice if you ever have a question about something that's in your contract. If you're ever uneasy about something that's in your contract, speak out about it. Because if you don't, you're going to be legally tied down to it. So make sure you have your bases covered. And on top of that, there are a lot of organizations out there that help people like that don't necessarily have the means of finding legal representation. There are people who will be willing to help you for free because they recognize that's an issue and they want to help with that.
That's a perfect segue to our next topic, which was from the individual player onto the teams. I know a number of you out here are looking to form teams locally. So for the players, what are some of those things that the players need to be aware of in the team agreements? And for the lawyers and others on this panel, what are the important aspects of team agreements that often get overlooked? We've already talked about what you can say on your own channel compared to the team channel, et cetera. What are those things that are important in team contracts that often get overlooked? So let's start with the players.
So the main thing I look for is a way out. Yeah, so I try to find at least 2 or 3 ways out in a contract usually. Whether it's them not giving me what they promised they would give me, a way for me to leave if I don't want to be there, or if a team wants to just kick me, just an easy way for me to leave without me having to either pay my way out or have to pretty much just sit on the bench and not be able to move on to another team. So I would say that's the most important thing when it comes to a contract, at least for me as a player. And the next thing is making sure everything's in writing. So if they say they're going to give me, a chair, then when are you going to give me that chair? What kind of chair is it? How long is the contract? Pretty much everything needs to be in writing because promises, just vocally, I would never trust that.
I've actually dealt with a couple of situations recently within the past 2 years when I was playing competitively, where my team was more interested in kind of getting signed, getting that done, and not really looking into the nitty gritty of what was going to happen in the contract. So I always stress looking through that. But as far as specifics, one of the first things I look for is a buyout clause and whether or not the contract contains that. Because what a lot of organizations will do is if they're paying you to represent their brand or they're providing you with gear or a sub button on Twitch, whatever it is, they're going to want something out of you in return. And if they see that you're a successful player, you're good, people are looking at you, there are a lot of teams that are interested in you, organizations will generally add a buyout clause or a clause that states that if you're released from the team, you can't compete for a certain duration of time legally. So absolutely look into that. Make sure you understand fully where you're at in the contract when it comes to that. And again, if you have any questions at all, there are always people online who are willing to help out with that.
So I guess I'll pick up I guess right where Brandon left off, which is one. We're talking a lot about a buyout clause. So one, I'll just mention real quick, just to make sure everyone understands what we're talking about. Most esports contracts very frequently will essentially you'll have a set duration, of course, and you want to bear in mind how long that duration is. Very frequently, they're only a year, but sometimes they will try and lock you up for longer. But the buyout clause essentially says you as a player, if you pay it may be $15,000, let's say, you can get out of that contract, right? And so the idea there is, let's say you want to switch leagues or you want to switch sponsoring orgs, whatever it might be, you have to pay them now $15,000 to get out of that contract so you can go someplace else. And one of the things that can be both good and bad, actually. It's actually, on the one hand, it's great that you actually have that way to get out. And what would frequently happen is the sponsoring org that you're going to move to, that's going to pick you up, they're a lot of times going to be the one that ultimately pays that buyout. So it does, in some way, give you a way to get out, which is good in and of itself. I would definitely say, though, that you want to be mindful of if it's really high, that of course will make it harder for you to go someplace else. It may wind up being the case that you can go, but you've got to throw in some of the money towards that. I would very strongly recommend anybody to push against a clause that says, if you are cut by the player, if the player is cut by the team, that you can't compete for another team. That's a ridiculous position. If they have cut you, they should not have any say as to what you are doing with the rest of your career. I would strongly resist against that clause, and if they would not get rid of it, I would personally kind of question whether or not that is an org you really want to be involved with. A couple of things I would also throw out. So you want to be mindful of how is it that you are getting paid, right? Are you going to be getting paid regularly, right? Are they going to be paying you what's effectively a salary, right? Where they're paying you every 2 weeks or every month? Or are you only getting paid if you win, right? That's a really important distinction. And it's also very important, not just to ensuring you're getting your money, but how are you planning for your day-to-day finances, right? If you make $50,000 winning a tournament at the end of the year, that's fantastic. But you need to get to the end of the year and you've got to pay your rent and all those other things. And maybe that sponsoring org is paying for some of those things. Maybe it's not, but you want to focus on when you're getting paid. You want to focus on things like the percentages that you're getting paid. Not all sponsoring orgs are going to give you the same terms in terms of what percentage of earnings do they keep versus what you keep. A lot of sponsoring orgs are going to say, we get X percent of your winnings, but they're not always going to say, not every sponsoring org is going to ask for that same amount. So bear that in mind, how much of your earnings you are giving to them. And I guess the last thing I'll kind of throw out, and then I'll pass it over to some other people. Think about how many hours they're asking you to go online. Some sponsoring orgs will require you to do a very large amount of streaming online. And obviously, as we were saying before, that's a very good thing for you. It builds up your brand, but it may not be your thing, right? Maybe you're not that guy that wants to be streaming live all the time when you're practicing, right? Maybe you're more comfortable by putting out lots of tweets and other things to grow yourself. So bear in mind what those sort of obligations are, because again, different sponsoring orgs will expect different things in terms of how much, work in a sense you must be doing.
Let me follow up on what Nate said, because Nate and I generally represent the studios, the IP owners, and the teams. We don't usually represent the players. And I think it is a non-starter for a player to have a non-compete. In fact, it works against the dynamic of a healthy league, that if a player gets cut, he should be able to go to other teams. And there is an open trade period where players get moved around. So if somebody's handing you a contract with a non-compete, I would really question that particular league. And this comes from somebody who's usually on the other side of that.
Yeah. And I'll let you guys keep going in terms of some of these other things, but I figured I'd actually go back to, from a league's perspective, talking about a couple of the things that we require, because from the league's perspective, I mean, there are things that we will force teams to change in their contracts because they don't fit with what the league structure is. But usually when you're starting out as a pro, that's probably not the most immediately important thing. So anyway.
Right. Yeah, so in the player agreements and in the team agreements, keep in mind that there's some things that are negotiable and there's some things that are not negotiable. The IP owner, the studio, and the teams, they're going to have discretion on conflict resolution, right? They're going to have rights to use your likeness and your image in their streaming. Those are things that are just non-negotiable, because if you're not willing to do that, or if you're not willing to allow them a lot of flexibility with that, they can't use you in their league. So those are not going to be things that are negotiable. But on the other hand, if you have the ability to make revenue and appearances that are unrelated to the league, if you have the ability to get endorsements that are unrelated to the league, you should be allowed to do those things, and you should be able to negotiate for them to the extent that the league or the teams restrict you from doing that, right? Because teams want to know that your endorsements and your appearances are in line with how they want to project themselves, and I think that's healthy. But there is a whole category of your presence online and your persona and your ability to make revenue that's not connected to the league, that existed before you were part of the league and will exist after you leave. And those things should be things that you can negotiate for.
And I'll just add that I think it's important to remember, even if there's an agent, a league, and a tournament operator, whoever, who's offering you the ability to use their attorney to look over your specific contract, please understand everyone's interests are, they're not always aligned, right? So just to echo what some of the other panelists said, make sure you're reading it, you understand what your compensation is. What is the team going to pick up? Are they going to pick up travel expenses? Are they going to help you with that paperwork that needs to be done? Or are you really out there on your own trying to get yourself to these different events? But really, I think I couldn't stress enough the importance of reading over your own agreement and maybe seeking some outside guidance in order to make sure that your interests are being met.
Yeah, I love that this has now gone into the event side, because that's the next area. I know that some folks here are looking for teams to go to the events, and others are actually looking to put on events as well. You had something, Josh?
No, I was
Okay.
just looking at you.
So on that side, we've started to touch on some of the things that you have to have. The event has to have the ability to stream you. The event has to be able to handle the conflict resolution and the like. But for the individual player, it is usually your team that is negotiating with the event, and the individual players are going to be bound essentially by the team agreement and whatever the team then negotiates with the event. What are the other areas that the event is concerned about? Is the event going to be focusing on how much promotion the team gives? Is that going to be in the contract? What other areas does an event need to consider in its contracts? And for the teams, what are the other problem points that you might have in those event contracts or negotiating with a specific league? David, you want to start, or we can start anywhere?
I just want to use this opportunity to advertise for DreamHack and for the
Right back there.
right, and for the Hi-Rez World Championship League.
Hey, Brawler World Championship is going to be at DreamHack Atlanta too.
That's right.
We can't forget that.
And everybody should be there.
Actually, in all sincerity, I mean, Atlanta has a lot of great esports things going on, and it is definitely something that is growing very quickly. And I mean, that's the Atlanta entertainment space as a whole, but it really is sort of a great place to be if you are interested in esports or video games or the entertainment field more generally. It is certainly a growing area. So.
And I can speak a little bit with respect to ELeague. So some of the things that we are looking for is we obviously will want to use your name, image, and likeness, and any other identifying attributes for our broadcasts, for our live stream. But what we've also started doing is kind of creating this post-produced content. So these sort of, or like a reality show. So we'd want to be able to use your IP in order to be able to do that. Some of the other kind of standard things is for teams looking to participate in our events, you have to understand we may have our, like ELeague has its own sponsors that we work with. And so we'll need to work with teams to make sure they understand who are our sponsors and make sure there are no conflicts there. And then just, this is like really dry legalese, but we usually require the teams and vis-a-vis the teams of players to release us from all liability associated with your
participation in our tournaments.
Yeah, I'll mention something on that post-produced content thing. If you're running an event or trying to put on an event, you need to remember that when your event is over, you still need people to think about what is going on. And also, before your event happens, you need people to remember that your event is happening. And so you'll need to look into some sort of produced content that isn't just live stream, that isn't just a commercial that you exist. And so having something like player interviews is a huge, huge deal and will get people that are just interested in those players then interested in your event or interested in the team interested in your event.
Excellent. Well, let's start moving forward into other areas of what it means to be an esports pro. So we've talked primarily about the competitors so far, but that is by no means all that is involved with being professional in esports. We've now added professional shoutcasters, we have the coaches, we have professional schedules. They've already talked about the agents who are involved in this one. Within your organization, what are those areas beyond competitors that are critical to successful esports teams or events?
People always forget about the tournament organizers as a whole. I have ran a couple hundred tournaments at this point, and people tend to forget that they exist and that those people actually need to exist for esports to even be a thing, really. And so if you're not, if esports, when you're getting into it, and being a pro player isn't really your thing, or running a team isn't really your thing, look into what it takes to run a live stream for an event, or moderate a bracket for an event, or even put one of your own on, right? And that really comes down to being within the community that you want to run for, whether it be Brawlhalla or Smite, Paladins, whatever. Being within that community, knowing what that community wants, and knowing where the kind of hole is that can be filled by your event, whether it be a weekly event, a monthly event, or you're just putting one on as a test to see if that's something you want to do. But I always recommend people look into organizing tournaments and helping with the organization of tournaments.
Other roles? Shoutcasters getting more important. What others?
So things like managing and coaching a team, I would say, is super important. A lot of times, players start off really young when they get into a scene and won't know how to, I guess, manage themselves or even just how to work as a team. So a coach and a manager could really help out with just making sure people get along. They're showing up on time, scheduling things like scrims. Sometimes they have to do interviews, so making sure that they show up for those. The other thing is making sure that they're communicating with not just themselves, but also with the organization that they're working with, and also the developers and tournament organizers, so that they get as many opportunities as they can to participate in things like charity events, all-star matches, things like that. Also, maybe even get a chance to work with other teams, work with other developers if they don't like playing anymore. So just once again, it's the whole networking thing.
Yeah, so if you aren't like I mentioned tournament organizers, but if you're trying to be like a shoutcaster too, or even a moderator for a bracket, you kind of have to follow the same guidelines that we've been setting out for if you get sponsored or if you're trying to get into the scene. You need to make sure that your public persona is something that people like, so it was mentioned before, if you're very toxic, no one's going to want you to cast for their game, because when people see that person is now the face for your game or your event. And you don't want someone that's toxic or rude being the face for your event. You want someone that is nice and outgoing and can explain a complicated tactic to someone that has never ever seen the game before or is brand new to the game. And so if you're trying to get into shoutcasting, a few things you need to look into is, for one, obviously knowing the game and knowing how to play the game, but also how to properly explain in very simple terms what is happening, because not everyone is going to know what a fair or a bear is. It's no, not a lot of people know that just going into an event, but they know what a punch is. They know what a kick is. They know that some purple stuff happened on the screen. So you need to be able to explain that and make it entertaining at the same time, as well as also just being a good face for that event or that game. That's why you see people like TK Breezy. If you guys are in the fighting game community, you see him kind of everywhere because he's funny, he's outgoing. All his social media is entertaining, and he's very good at explaining what is happening in a very, very entertaining way and simple to understand way.
I think purple stuff on the screen is sort of self-explanatory, but other than that, I agree
Every
with
single
all of
game
it.
has purple stuff on the
Yeah,
screen.
yeah, yeah.
All of them.
Purple's a very, very popular one.
So there is a almost endless list of roles that go into esports, both on the tournament operating side as well as um, day-to-day broadcasting. So, for example, at Skillshot, we have probably like 40 full-time employees, something like that. 50 maybe. Okay, so I mean, it's don't forget about all of those behind the camera roles, right? I mean, it's just like operating, a TV show, right? I mean, you have people that are doing an awful lot of technical things, that you don't see them on screen, but they are critical to what is happening, right? And these are great roles, by the way, too. I mean, if you're somebody who's interested in, being in the media space, even if you aren't necessarily interested specifically in video games or specifically in esports, a lot of the technical jobs are very similar to the jobs that you would have, at a TV studio. So definitely, it's something to kind of think about. But there's also lots of other roles that are just administrative roles. These are large events. There's an awful lot of, just project management, if you will, that goes into running esports. Um, think of an event like DreamHack, there's going to be thousands and thousands and thousands of people walking through those doors. And, there's an awful lot that goes into that. I mean, everything from, security to, managing the technical setting up of everything that's going on there. I mean, we will have probably, I don't know, maybe 50 to 100 event volunteers working just for Skillshot at DreamHack, right? And there's going to be lots of other publishers that are there. So if you're interested in trying to get into it, that's another thing you can do, right? You can just help out at a large event like that, and you'll make some connections. You'll also learn a little bit about some of that event management, and you know the best way to learn, I think, at a lot of those sorts of things is just, to dive in, right? Like, don't worry about whether or not you've done something beforehand. Just be willing to help out with literally anything that is there. And if people see that you have, that great attitude, you're willing to work hard, you're showing up on time and all those things, there will be other things that they will think of you for, and it will lead to other opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I started running tournaments in late 2015, and I kind of just kept doing it because it was something I was interested in. First one I ever ran, I had no idea what I was doing. I just know that I wanted to do it, right? And I worked with other people that had no idea what they were doing, and they just wanted to do it. And we did it enough until where in 2016, at the end of the year, I was part running the world championship for Brawlhalla. 2017, same thing, and then all the online championships, just because I kind of just did it, and I saw roles that needed filling, and I filled them either with something that I could do or with other people that were just in the community that want to do something like that. So yeah, there's so many things that you can just start doing, and if you keep doing it and you're consistent, you have a schedule, then you'll get noticed and your events will get bigger and bigger and you'll have a great time doing it. I promise.
That's great. That's great. One role we haven't talked on is one that is rapidly growing now, and that seems to be the agent. And they seem to be all over the place right now. What they do, what their quality is, et cetera. And I'm really interested in the different views on this. Would love to start with the players. I don't know if you have agents or have dealt with them. What do you look for an agent? What do you consider warning? What would you like the agent to do? And for those of you who deal with agents on the business end, what's good about them and what isn't?
As far as agents, it's not extremely common in esports as a pro player when you're on a team, because for the most part, your agent is somebody on the team. It's your team captain. It's somebody that's representing you and looking out for you. Um, but I think more looking at stuff like fighting games and games where you're an individual, or looking at, if you're a shoutcaster and you have an agent and you have somebody who's scheduling you for events and trying to get you shoutcasting in different places. I think one of the most important things to look for, specifically when it comes to like somebody on your team who's representing you as an agent, is somebody who understands the the core goal of what everybody is looking for, making sure that everybody's on the same page of the ultimate goal that they want to achieve. And trust is the most important thing. If it's somebody that you don't know that well, you have to build trust with them and make sure that they're looking out for your best interest at the end of the day.
There's a very broad spectrum of so agents. A good agent is worth their weight in gold. A good lawyer is worth their weight in gold. I mean, obviously, your agent, you're going to have to pay them a fee. Your lawyer, you're going to have to pay them a fee. But the good ones are definitely worthwhile. And make sure you interview them. Make sure you interview more than one of them. Make sure check their references. Talk to other players that they represent to see how good they are. It's an industry that's inventing itself right now. It's right, and there's a lot of people who are rushing in to fill roles in the industry. So just make sure that it's somebody who's not brand new, that they know what to look for. So ask them a lot of pointed questions before you hire them.
And even after you hire them, I mean, bear in mind, right? This is somebody who is working for you, right? Yes, part of the role sometimes of a manager, of a agent, especially in esports where some of the competitors are quite young. Yes, some of the roles are as simple as, hey, the alarm clock went off. We've got a flight in 3 hours, guys. Get up. Okay, yes, you need to listen to them and all those things. But they work for you, right? And if you really don't feel comfortable about the decisions they're making for you, or if you're asking them questions and they can't give you a good answer for why they're saying you have to do something, that would be a concern, right? And I agree. I think that good agents and other representatives are going to be very, very valuable to you. But you do want to be mindful that there are some people that are pretty not so, they don't necessarily all have your best interests at heart, or they don't necessarily have the right experience, right? I mean, they may have very great intentions, but they're pretty new to it too, and you need to just kind of be a little bit realistic about that too. And I guess one other thing I'll also throw out is another advisor sort of role to be great to have, whether it's an agent or somebody else, somebody that can teach you some financial literacy. Managing your finances is a very important part of being any kind of professional. And, it's definitely something that I think in a lot of different ways in esports, there are sponsoring orgs, there are leagues, et cetera, that are trying to help teams and players with some of those financial literacy components. But, it's great when you start making money from esports, but money goes really fast if you're not managing it well. And, a good agent definitely can help you with some of those things.
Yeah, don't be afraid of someone that has a very professional sounding title. Like he mentioned, like if that person isn't doing something that you really are into, and just because they say they're an agent, they should know best. If you don't like it, then you vocalize that. And if they keep making those decisions that aren't in what you think, I mean, obviously is your best interest, then you need to reconsider that agent or that lawyer or whoever has this professional title.
Excellent. So one thing that we're hearing out of all this is one of the possibly the greatest thing of value a team brings with it is the community that follows it. That community is of more value than their skill at the games, et cetera. That community is what makes them really a team to be reckoned with and be considered for big events. So first, for the teams, are there roles that have to be involved with building that community, other than a social media manager, a community manager? Do appearances have to be considered part of an individual player's contract? Are there appearance fees that go along with that? Do the players and the teams need to consider those aspects? And for those of you who deal with the teams, what role really is their community play in your decisions and who gets invited and the like? Is it the size all that matters? Is it the involvement of that community? Is it the demographics community? What really plays the role in when you consider their community? So let's start with the players and teams on how do you best involve that, become involved with the community, and what roles do you have in doing that?
So I would say the esports landscape is kind of changing now, especially with battle royale games. to where it's not necessarily the most skilled teams that get invited to tournaments and stuff. It's more of a presence, having a presence, um, bringing views to streams, bringing views to tournaments, and just having a community behind you. So a lot of teams now are, or a lot of organizations starting to pick up more streamers, picking up more content creators, just more personalities rather than just skill-based players. So you obviously want to have a very good community team as a part of your organization to sell those players to the tournaments, to the tournament organizers to notice you and your players. And you also want your players to be in that role of selling themselves. So acting in the way that they should be professionally online, and also just kind of just building brands, not only for the organization but for each player individually and as a team as a whole.
Yeah, he actually made a very good point about, and somebody actually mentioned it earlier as well. When it came to marketability and organizations wanting to pick up players more based on who you are as an individual and not necessarily how skilled you are as an individual. Um, a prime example of that are the tournaments that Keemstar does. He used to do the Fortnite Friday tournaments and whatnot, where the majority of the people that he's inviting are people who have big followings, people who are going to bring in views, people who are going to, bring in ad revenue, people who are going to purchase merchandise. It's all about having a following of dedicated people, and building that following with who you are as an individual and what you bring to the table, and creating content never hurts. There's never a downside, no matter where it is, to creating content, because it shows that you are the type of person that is able to bring something to the table that I'd say 80% of competitive players can't or aren't willing to, because of the effort that's required to put into just how taxing being a content creator is at the end of the day. It's a lot of work. A lot of people don't realize how much work it really is. And if you can hone in your skill of who you are and what your audience is, and what people are looking for within that subset that you're interested in, you can really make an impact in making sure that you are involved in a lot of the important tournaments, and just evolving with esports as it grows, because it's changing every day.
Let me add a
Yeah.
different perspective on that, which is don't ever forget that the team it's a business, right? So the studio that puts on the league and owns the intellectual property is a business. They're trying to create a lot of player engagement. They're trying to lengthen the playability of their games. Um, and the team owners that run teams, they pay a lot of money for those teams. They have a lot of cost and a lot of overhead, and they have to generate revenue. So all of that engagement, with the community and having a lot of streaming and a lot of really good content has to translate into revenue for them so that they can afford the slotting fees that they have to pay, which are now in the tens of millions for the Overwatches and for the other large leagues. So that
So,
drives a lot of what they decide to do.
Um, that's definitely right, and it's well, a couple things. One, I want to throw out. I mean, like definitely like battle royale. I mean, maybe it's going to be a just battle royale specific thing, but maybe it's going to be a industry wide sort of shift that even for big tournaments, big leagues, are you watching it from that player's perspective, or are you watching it from some sort of centralized stream? We're seeing a lot more with battle royales, which only increases the need to have your own stream. But that said, I will also say, I mean, it's you want to stay true to you and what you feel comfortable with, right? And some people don't like to stream, right? But they feel fine making a VOD. They just, I don't know, for whatever reason, they don't want to do it live. And so from a tournament operator perspective, from a league operator perspective, we very much do want, players and teams to be out there to be creating content. But, we try and be flexible with people in terms of what content they're making, right? At the end of the day, if they're making VODs, if they're streaming, if they're getting views, it's kind of the same, right? I would also throw out that stay true to yourself in terms of your personality, right? I mean, you could grow a following by being really good. You can grow a following by being very funny and entertaining. You can grow a following just by being very helpful and educational while you're playing, right? Um, we watch the pros in part because we want to see what it's like to play at the best level, but also to learn a little bit, how we can be better ourselves. Um, I will also throw out something else in the kind of like, talk about the fit of your image. Um, Not every sponsor is sort of the same. And here I'm not talking sponsoring orgs, I'm talking sponsoring brands, right? So, when people maybe offering you money or your team money to be the official blank of, your team, whatever your team is, uh, that's fantastic. But at the same time, you need to bear in mind that for some tournaments, some leagues, they're not going to permit you to be associated with some things, right? I mean, some of those might seem pretty obvious, right? Like, really, really deplorable sort of things. But some of them are in a more of a bit of a gray area, right? For example, there are some sponsoring orgs that will take sponsors that are gambling websites. Well, that's not something that every league wants to be associated with, right? There's an image concern there about credibility and stuff like that. What does it say that you've got this casino name on your jersey, right? Similarly,
No college wants to see that.
yeah. And a lot of league operators and tournament operators aren't necessarily going to want to see an alcohol sponsor. A lot of the esports audience is very young. So you need to bear in mind that, what sponsors you have, is a reflection a little bit on you as well, and that too is something to kind of think about. That said, I mean, go seek sponsors as a general matter. It's a great thing, and there's definitely a place for your team to, have its own sponsors in addition to the league sponsors. That's a very common thing, but something to think about there too.
All right, one last question for me, and we'll open it for a question from the audience. We've got a number of college students here I know who are on teams already and thinking about going pro. What is the one thing a college student could do this week, this month, this year to best prepare themselves for going pro? Throw that out to anybody.
Well, we actually at Skillshot Media just teamed up with NACE for running our college tournaments for Paladins and Smite. I think the number one thing you can do is look into organizations such as AVGL. College esports is on the rise, and there are a lot of organizations that are looking to provide content with people who are in college and who are good at video games. So I would just look into it. If you want to come up and talk to me after the panel, I can give you some information on what we're working on with NAC as far as developing a league and developing a presence within Georgia specifically to help esports thrive for college students.
Yeah, and I would say if you're in college right now, especially if you're in the early years, I mean, you're in at a good time because there's obviously a lot of growth and transition that's happening in the esports industry in general. So if you're a freshman, by the time you become a senior, the scene may just be ready to have kind of a direct path for you. But in the meantime, I'd say just try to make sure that you're racking up lots of time in tournaments and leagues and play as much as possible within your esports organization, because ultimately I think that a lot of what you're doing within the schools are going to be seen as quality competition, quality wins. There's a big difference between playing and winning whenever you're drunk at home on a Saturday night than whenever you're playing in a tournament where it's expected that you're trying to do your best. And my company specifically is, for example, taking and separating both of those types of play so that we'll judge your play in tournaments and college and in leagues more strongly because we know that that was your best effort. We know that that wasn't you trying out a new character or trying out a new strategy. So being in a collegiate team or organized teams in general, make sure that you're getting out there and participating in events that have some sort of weight to them, some sort of value, even if they're at the local level. And it's a the prize pool is $250. Either way, as we start to look and analyze what kind of play you're doing, we know, well, this is them when they were really trying to be their best, as opposed to when they were just messing around with friends.
Yeah, one of the things I would say is really just change your mindset, right? If you think that just because you're winning some events at your school that you're the best and sponsors are going to come running to you, that's just not going to happen, right? You need to, I mean, experience is great and winning those events is great, but no one's just going to come to you really. Like you need to make sure that you're putting yourself out there, and if you want to be a professional player, it really does start with you saying, like, setting goals for yourself and following through with those goals, or doing your best to make it to those goals that you set for yourself. And also, don't get discouraged after losses. Only one person can win, Don't get discouraged.
Um, Yeah, so I'll throw out a fairly simple, not even necessarily that esports specific thing. I mean, if you have a goal for something, including a goal to become an esports pro, think about a plan, right? I mean, just come up with some very realistic, achievable goals for yourself. And, at the beginning, those goals may be as simple as, hey, I'm not just going to practice when I feel like it. I'm going to come up with a schedule, right? To make sure that I'm doing that, right? I'm going to this week go look for one tournament that I'm going to sign up for, right? Or I'm going to this week go find at least one person that I want to play with as one of my teammates, and the next week we'll go find another one. And that may sound really sort of simple, but and I mean almost to the point of being silly, but I assure you, I mean it's like everything else. I mean if you're planning for it, you're going to have more likelihood of success if you actually, think through the things you want to do and come up with realistic sort of steps and break them up in chunks like that. That definitely will be a great way to get started for success.
Yeah, to sort of go off of that, you mentioned that it's at that one tournament that you want to go and sign up for. Um, Really, if you can, treat every tournament as the championship, right? Always do your best at those. So I'll see. There's one player in the Brawlhalla scene, Addy Mestic, who is the top European player right now. He treats every tournament the same, right? He plays his best in every single tournament, whether it be that $100 weekly that is ran by the community, or it be the summer championship that is ran by Blue Mammoth Games. He takes everything as serious as if it was that world championship. And because of it, he is the number one player in Europe right now. And it's just a full mindset thing that, like, he just takes everything seriously and does his best in everything he can.
Excellent. All right. Do you have one more comment? Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so I wanted to say, so I actually graduated pretty recently, about 6 months ago. And I would say that the big thing is just planning around classes too. Don't screw up your education just to play. So I actually went a 5th semester just so I could play. So make sure you're going to your classes and make sure that whatever you schedule for whether it's scrimming or tournaments or whatever, work with your classes. Whether that means having to go for an extra year, another semester, so be it if you can handle that, obviously. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, obviously. So yeah, that would be my word of advice if you're still going to school and trying to compete. It can be hard, but if you're willing to put the effort in, you could do both.
All right. We don't really have time for a question from the audience, but if you have one, we'll take it. Otherwise, our panelists will be around for a short bit. But if you have a question, come on up to the mic right here. Oh, whoa, hey. You had a mic and now it's in my hand. Oh,
Hi. So, weird question, but I like watching esports, but I have color blindness, and a lot of games they have colorblind modes. It's really good, but the streams usually don't have that enabled. Is there any way to like really push that, like kind of have like a voice where that can get recognized, or like have that become like more of an industry standard to let me watch more esports?
So I'm also colorblind.
Oh.
But no, I mean, you have to approach Twitch,
Mhm.
right? So, and they definitely have a customer service it may go into the ether. I don't know, but it's a legitimate issue, and there's a large enough population out there that you should probably see if you can get some traction with them or with YouTube. Or
Awesome. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. One thing on that, a lot of times tournaments will have casters that, at least if they know what they're doing, will acknowledge that there are colorblind people that are watching and will do their best to not refer to things by color, like if it be red team or blue team. So yeah, it's something that I've pushed for to make sure that my casters remember that the audience is more than just everyone kind of knows what's going on. And yeah, so really, it's definitely something for Twitch, but then also something for tournament organizers to remember when they're talking to their casters. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much to our panel. You all can stick around for a minute or two if there are any questions. If you have questions individually, feel free to